This is Brian Lehrer Live, where web video meets the issues. This week, President Obama signed legislation that will reform the federal student loan program, eliminating banks as the middleman and using the savings to expand Pell Grants for low-income students. That might help some students, but college tuition has been outpacing inflation for decades. In her book, Generation Debt, our next guest, Anya Kamenetz, showed how today's generations are in trouble because of student loans. Now in her new book, DIYU, she explains how college got so expensive and reveals a cadre of innovators who want to fix higher education with technology, social media, and a whole new kind of learning center. Anya, welcome.
Thank you, Brian.
DIYU, DIY for Do-It-Yourself.
Do-It-Yourself University.
And this is a very wide-ranging book. I'll say I'm even in there. You recount a conversation or something that happened when you were a guest on my show when we did the radio show from Hofstra University on WNYC. Why don't you tell that story?
Sure. So you'd set up this whole conversation in front of a live student audience, and the provost of the university was there. And he was asked to sort of answer the question in front of the students who were carrying these, enormous student loan burdens. Why is it that Hofstra's tuition is going up 7% a year? And I think we both kind of felt like his answers were not very satisfying, actually inadvertently quite revealing.
Inadvertently quite revealing? Because?
Well, I think so, because he said, I think, students are demanding all these extra perks. He didn't call them perks. He said a textured experience. I have a high student-teacher, ratio, and I have mental health services and recreational services. And bottom line, he said, we don't think it's a good idea to talk about costs at all, because anything that controls costs is something that is services that our students demand, and our hands are totally tied. We can't look at costs.
Students demand and parents demand low student-teacher ratio, a fitness center, to rival the private gyms. And so what did that little revealing moment tell you? What's the underlying story there?
Well, the bottom line, he said, the bottom line itself is, students need that college degree, and they don't have a choice. They're going to end up in a dead-end job if they don't get a college degree. So what you have is you have students that are caught between this, we have this huge middle-class story that everybody in America says you must get a college degree. And in fact, very few of the jobs that are available that pay a middle-class salary are out there if you don't have a college degree. And on the other hand, you have this very diverse and wide-ranging, independently operating group of universities that is not sensitive to costs. They don't want to talk about costs. Productivity is a dirty word. Efficiency is a dirty word. And they basically are interested in, from Hofstra's point of view, not to pick on them, but their rankings in the U.S. News and World Report is based essentially on how much money they spend per student and how selective they are. So the logical thing for them to do is to raise tuition, raising spending, and to accept fewer students.
Is this getting better, ironically, perhaps, because of the financial collapse and, the devaluing of the endowments and the problems families are having paying tuition, the state's problems all over the country in funding their state universities?
I would love to say that it's getting better, but the fact is that higher education has never been in the crisis that it's in now. The chancellor of the University of California, Charles Reed, told me that in 40 years in politics and education, he'd never seen a meltdown like this. He said this is the end of the master plan in California, which means that after 40 years, basically since 1960, that the public system is saying we're abdicating our responsibility or our commitment to provide affordable higher education to all the people that need it.
That would be a tragedy.
Well, it's an absolute tragedy. It's a tragedy not just for the young people, but it's for our country's future, right? We're supposed to have a human capital policy and an information economy. So to throw up our hands and say we can't do anything about tuition increasing at twice the rate of inflation, I think it's an abdication of public responsibility, not to be too.
So your book contains some of these problems, as you describe them, and also some solutions.
Well, that's the neat thing about it, Brian, because I started out with Generation Debt, and I was talking about the problems with student loans and credit card debt. And now I'm a writer for Fast Company magazine, which is a magazine about innovation and business, and I write all the time about technology disrupting knowledge industries and information industries. Music, we've seen it, movies, we've seen it with books to some extent. Now, education is the ultimate information industry. It's not just an industry, and it's not just about information, but it is essentially about transmitting knowledge. It's about communication and community. And all of these things are things that are being profoundly transformed with the internet. And so the question becomes, can we use these new technologies, this new social media and internet to transform the structure of higher education?
You brought a video with you of a college dropout,
yes,
funnily enough, named Dan Brown. You want to set this up and we'll see a little bit of one of his rants?
Sure. So Dan Brown, if you don't watch YouTube, he is a YouTube star. He's 19 or 20 years old, and he made this video to explain to his students, his teachers and his parents, why he was dropping out of the University of Nebraska-Lincoln in order to pursue his career as a YouTube star.
Let's check out Dan Brown.
Society is not done moving forward, and with the advent of the internet, the monetary value of information is fast approaching zero. This is not a bad thing. It is a good thing. And not only is it a good thing, it is the best thing to have ever happened to human beings. Because of the internet, information is now free. And by free, I don't just mean doesn't cost any money, I also mean that it has been liberated. Example, 15 years ago, if one was planning a road trip, they'd need to go to the store, purchase an atlas, and painstakingly chart their course. Today, you can just type it into Google Maps, or Bing Maps, or MapQuest, and you're done! There are literally millions of examples like this spanning every single aspect of society, and while we're still in the early stages, this is the revolution I'm talking about. And most societal entities are reinventing themselves to prepare for this revolution. The music industry has embraced iTunes. Governments have taken significant steps towards transparency. And successful businesses are looking less like Dilbert and more like Google. But what has education done to reinvent itself? In my experience, nothing. I mean, sure, you've started using email, online databases, services like Blackboard, and if this were 1999, I'd be saying great! But it's not 1999, and if institutional education wants to survive in the information age, then institutional education needs to do more than just adopt a few new tools.
So he dropped out of the education system to rant against the education system.
Well, you know, that was one of his videos and he made it to get a reaction. I think that what you're seeing there, what interests me about him is he's really the voice of the digital native generation who are saying, I'm being asked to pay $15,000 a year, $20,000 a year for a public university tuition, $1,000 a year for paper textbooks that I'm dragging around. This does not serve me. I can get any information I want on the internet in the click of a button. Why isn't there a format of education and an affordability of education that matches what I see in the media that I consume?
Are there cutting-edge positive examples?
As a matter of fact, there are. You know, in the book, I point to probably the best-known example is MIT's OpenCourseWare. Starting in 2001, the university chose to put all 1,900 of its courses online. That's video lectures, texts, tests, and questions and answers. About 60, 70 million people have accessed it all around the world. It's being used as a supplement for self-learners and also in courses. And that is just one example. There are hundreds of institutions all around the world that are putting this wealth of information online for free.
So why would MIT, one of the most expensive and one of the most selective colleges in America, sort of compete with itself by putting its own course material online for free? Are they destroying their own business model?
It's a fascinating question. And you know, if you're familiar with the book Free by Chris Anderson, I think MIT is pursuing what you might call a freemium model. So what they're doing is they're putting out this stuff as part of their public mission, certainly, but also to expand their brand and the knowledge of MIT. And people can, yes, they can study on their own with it, but there always comes a point where you need a teacher and you need a community. Now, MIT is able to charge premium prices for being in the classroom with a professor. The question is, are there intermediaries that are able to come in and disrupt the business model by saying, okay, subscribe to the MIT feed for free, and we'll sell you a package of this much time with a tutor and this much time with a community? Or are there nonprofits that are willing to come in, like Peer-to-Peer University is one example, and there are online networks of communities of people that are working around the open education, open courseware resources to study and learn on their own independently for free.
But then who do you go drinking with at the campus bar?
Your Facebook buddies.
Virtual drinking.
Well, I think there's always going to, it's a very important question. There's always going to be a role for face-to-face. I talk a lot in the book about experiential education, vocational education. You know, you have to pair this with travel, volunteering. It's not all going to be done through the screen, but the screen is going to substitute for what we think the most boring part of learning is, sitting in a lecture or taking notes.
And you quote an educator as saying the textbook is the Hummer of higher education. Explain.
Well, Judy Baker, she's at the Community College Consortium for Open Educational Resources. She's talking about this big, heavy, expensive, $1,000 a year, non-modifiable. It can only be opened up once. It's got a copyright on it. And when you compare that to an infinitely malleable text that you can find online that people can edit, can comment on, can share from place to place, I mean, there's really no comparison for learning, for the purposes of learning.
So there's a school in Pennsylvania, Seton Hill University, not Seton Hall in New Jersey, Seton Hill in Pennsylvania, that's giving every student that enrolls an iPad. And that's supposed to replace the textbooks?
Well, I would be a little cautious about that because, you know, there's been many ways of embracing in technology and education in that sense, in that form. You can't just layer technology on top of the existing course formats and expect that to save, number one, save any money, or number two, necessarily improve learning. I think what the iPad can possibly do is, if it can actually enable a student to go out into the field and learn on their own, and if we can get open source text on it, then it can maybe improve learning and actually lower the cost at the same time, which is so key.
You use Carnegie Mellon as another positive example. What are they doing there?
Well, at Carnegie Mellon, they're really pioneers in the format of artificial intelligence and computer assisted learning. So rather than just think of a traditional class that's delivered online, what you have is very structured tutoring programs that offer you very targeted feedback and assessment, and they're constantly learning as you learn, adapting to your answers so that you go along with them. And they are showing that they're able to teach courses like statistics, courses like math, in sometimes a quarter of the class time.
You even reference Second Life, the website where you take an avatar to sort of represent another you. What does Second Life have to do with higher education?
Well, that's a really fun example of a way that immersive adaptive video game models can be used to sometimes replicate and sometimes go beyond the best of what experiential learning can offer. So for example, there's a Canadian college that created a virtual border patrol to help train their border customs agents. And it's an environment like a flight simulator, which goes way back in the military, right? But it's not just a flight simulator, you can simulate anything you might want to learn. And isn't that a great way to train, going beyond just, again, the face-to-face classroom model?
One other idea from your book, you call it edupunk.
Yes.
What's edupunk?
Well, edupunks is something I owe a lot of this book to. The edupunk spirit is really the DIY spirit of saying we're going to use free and open source courseware, free and open source technologies like blogs and wikis, and we're going to go back to the original roots of the university. So the university, starting in medieval times, were this group of monks and philosophers from all different countries who gathered together outside the auspices of the church, outside the auspices of the state or the military, to study freely, you know, to take advantage of this new technology, then the book, and to share knowledge. And that is exactly what the internet and what the edupunks are doing today.
So we have a minute left. Should CUNY, should other universities feel threatened or empowered, or a combination of both, by your book?
I want students to feel empowered. I think the DIYU is all about putting learning in the hands of the students and a student-centered model, and public institutions like CUNY are exactly the ones that are best positioned to improve the lives of their students, to save money, to be innovative, and to really reconfigure the way that higher education is going to work in the future.
All right. Anya and I are going to continue this conversation on my radio show on Friday morning,
Yes.
when we're going to take phone calls and get the reactions of actual students and current college professors and maybe even administrators if they dare to call in.
Excellent.
Okay?
Excellent.
So that's Friday morning on my WNYC radio show. Anya, talk to you then.
Thanks.
And that's the future of higher education. But for now at least, teaching is still done the old-fashioned way, from grammar school up. But of course, some do it far better than others. So next up on Brian Lehrer Live, actual video from the classroom of great teachers in action. Wait till you see these.